Hello and welcome back to the Discover History YouTube channel. Today I want to return back to the Battle of Waterloo. I've already done 4 videos on aspects of the battle, and I'm hoping that in those I showed that if you look at the main phases of the battle, it's very easy to understand. It's a very simple battle, but it's when you get down to the details that's where all the confusion, the contradiction and all the debate arises. And this time have I got a doozy for you. I am going to look at the great French cavalry charges from the afternoon of the battle. And I'm going to approach it from 2 angles. I'm going to approach it from what we can be reasonably sure occurred. And then for the second half, I'm going to look at all the debate, all the contradiction, all the confusion. I have looked at every book we've got in the Discover History Library concerning the Battle of Waterloo, and every one of them tells me something different. So this isn't going to be this is what happened video. This is me saying that's what we can be sure of, this is what's up for debate, and this is what's confusing. So I hope you enjoy. Like I say, we're going to start with what we can be reasonably sure happened on the afternoon of the 18th on that ridge at Mont Saint-Jean. For some 2 hours during the late afternoon, the French reserve cavalry and the cavalry of the Imperial Guard launched a series of charges against Wellington's right centre. No doubt, having watched the cavalry move across the Brussels road from the French right wing and form up across the valley, Wellington had time to prepare to receive the attack. His infantry formed square, supported by the remainder of his light cavalry, and the gun crews received their instructions. The attack frontage was restricted to 700 to 800 metres to avoid flanking fire as they rode between Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte. For the first hour, repeated charges were made by General de Division Milhaud's 4th Reserve Cavalry Corps and the Light Cavalry Division of the Imperial Guard, some 5,000 troopers. Milhaud's corps comprised 8 regiments of cuirassiers, big men in breast and back plates on big horses, Napoleon's shock troops. The light cavalry of the Imperial Guard were lancers and chasseurs. During the second hour, General Kellerman's 3rd Reserve Cavalry Corps and the Heavy Cavalry Division of the Imperial Guard were ordered to reinforce the attack, a further 4,000 troopers. Kellerman's corps was smaller and less heavy, being a mix of cuirassiers, the similar armoured carabiniers and light dragoons. The heavy branch of the Imperial Guard were the Empress Dragoons and the Grenadiers à Cheval, nicknamed the Giants or Gods. They were the elite of the elite and were mounted on large black steeds. Once formed up in front of the French left wing, the initial force, led by Marshal Ney, advanced the 1,000 metres to the Allied-held ridge. As is normal, this advance was made at a walk and then a trot. These speeds enabled regiments and squadrons to maintain formation before increasing speed whilst closing in on the enemy. As they trotted up the slope, they were swept by round shot and canister, which tore great holes in their ranks. Then the troopers breasted the crest of the ridge. They were now confronted with a patchwork of some 20 immobile infantry squares and the sight of Allied gun crews following their instructions by bolting to the shelter of them, leaving their cannon vulnerable to capture or spiking. Tactics of the day dictated that the last 50 metres or so were made at charge speed, the so-called wild charge. The packed nature of the formation and the muddy ground on this day meant that the trot was maintained throughout. As each squadron approached a square, it received musketry volleys and then veered off and rode through the gaps between the squares, where they were counterattacked by the Allied cavalry waiting to the rear, and pushed back through the squares, or even some tried to escape around the flank. With the cavalry retiring back over the ridge to reform, the French artillery resumed its fire, causing casualties amongst the infantry. The cavalry returned to mill ineffectively around the squares before retiring once more. After an hour, the attack was reinforced, and now some 9,000 troopers were alternatively charging and retiring, with the French artillery causing more infantry casualties between charges. No serious attempt was made to disable or drag away any of the Allied cannon, and between each charge, the Allied gun crews returned to their guns to fire more round shot and canister into the reforming cavalry. Wellington's fears that Napoleon might seek to outflank his position would appear to be allayed by this and the earlier infantry attack, and he risked bringing up his reserves, in particular Adams' brigade, which he placed on the forward slope in front of the inexperienced Brunswick infantry. After 2 hours of achieving nothing of any importance, except scaring the bejesus out of the Hanoverian Cumberland Hussars, who fled the field around 5 p.m, the attack ceased and the cavalry finally retired. The cream of Napoleon's cavalry was exhausted. Horses could raise nothing more than a walk. The ridge was a pitiful sight, piled high with dead and wounded troopers and their horses. Authors' opinions vary. Ney is said to have observed some rearward movement of Wellington's army, and also lots of men moving down the road towards Mont Saint-Jean, though how he saw through that ridge from where he was, I really don't know. But in his mind, if a force of cuirassiers appeared on top of that now vacant ridge, he could turn retreat into a rout. Wellington certainly made some adjustment of his line at this time, including ordering some battalions to fall back 100 paces to shelter them from the worst of the French artillery fire. Then again, Napoleon was well aware of the approach of the Prussian army, that time was running out and he would prefer to deal with one opponent before having to cope with another. He also knew that the majority of his infantry was either committed to Hougoumont or was disorganised after its attack against Wellington's left and its subsequent rout by the British heavy cavalry. If he was to break Wellington right now, the only forces he knew he could rely on were his artillery and his cavalry. Marshal Ney is most often regarded as the sole instigator, and even Napoleon blamed him in his memoirs for launching the cavalry an hour too early. He may have been the bravest of the brave, but he was also temperamental, and his impulsiveness bordered on rashness and recklessness. Napoleon, though, doesn't escape scot-free. There are some that say that Ney was acting under his orders. As just mentioned, he needed Wellington out of the picture before the Prussians arrived. Also, if he did think the cavalry had been launched an hour too early, he had plenty of time to rescind that order. Moving 5,000 cavalry and forming them up is quite a lengthy process. One of Meaux's brigade commanders, Delors, even refused Ney's verbal order until that order was confirmed by Napoleon's chief of staff. It was Napoleon who personally ordered Kellerman and the rest of the guard to reinforce Meaux, thus giving some credence to the fact that he had requested that Wellington be dealt with swiftly, despite what he may have said retrospectively. And this leads nicely on to attaching the light cavalry made perfect sense. If the cuirassiers succeeded in their task of routing Wellington, light cavalry was a perfect pursuit tool. There are sources that say Meaux, after receiving Ney's orders and acting on his own initiative, rode up to the Guards light cavalry commander, Lefebvre Desrunets, and asked him to support the charge. thinking that Mio was passing on Napoleon's orders, agreed. Now here's something worth considering. Mio's supposed actions would point to Ney giving the orders. Mio was under his command, and Ney had authority over the heavy cavalry only. But acting so impulsively, would he have even considered the benefit of adding light cavalry to that charge? Mio certainly would have. But does the fact that the guard was included clearly indicate that these were Napoleon's orders? The entire guard was under his personal command. It wouldn't act without his say-so, and no one would risk interfering with that chain of command. There is consensus that the cavalry charges lasted 2 hours, with the greatest contradictions over when the orders were issued, the initial advance took place, and the final cavalry charge occurred. 3:30 is variously quoted as being when Ney first saw that rearward movement, or when the orders were first issued, or the time the advance began, or the time the first charge struck home. It is agreed that Kellerman entered the battle after the first hour, and a time, if it's mentioned, it's usually 5 p.m. 5:30 is often stated as when the final cavalry charge took place, and there is one mention of the ridge being empty of French cavalry by 6 p.m. 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. is the most likely timescale. Written details of the formations used by the cavalry at Waterloo are vague and open to interpretation, and many of the maps contradictory. And it is best to look at standard Napoleonic cavalry tactics. I'm going to use my Wargames figures to illustrate my conclusions, with one base representing a 2-rank squadron and 4 bases representing a cavalry regiment at full strength, which many regiments at Waterloo weren't. One formation we can discount immediately is a regiment in column of squadrons. Attacking like this makes the 3 rear squadrons tactically worthless, as each squadron impedes the one to its rear. So a line of regiments in column is also discounted, as this compounds the problems. So maybe they strung the squadrons out in line. This is somewhat better, but all squadrons striking at once means they can all be stopped at once by musketry, and there's no flexibility in the formation. Changing direction will be extremely difficult. The actual tactics were to advance in echelon. This way each squadron was tactically useful, the formation flexible and able to respond to circumstances, and the enemy subjected to consecutive charges, thus putting increased strain on the defending formation as regards maintaining firepower and discipline. How did a formation in echelon look at Waterloo? Like this? Straight line of regiments in echelon? I don't think so. In Weller's Wellington at Waterloo, he writes, "The French attacked by squadrons and regiments in echelon from the right." So I would interpret that as meaning this. Which brings us neatly to the entire force formed up ready to advance. If I paraphrase Siborne this time, he writes, "The first line of cuirassiers shone in burnished steel. Next came the red lancers of the guard, the third line comprising the chasseurs of the guard." The restricted width of the ground would have compressed normal deployment somewhat, but Weller says it was wide enough to accommodate 12 squadrons. Taking this into account then, Mio's cuirassiers may have formed 2 lines, with the guard as the third, each line separated by about 100 metres, such as this. Kellerman's force and the guard heavy cavalry may have appeared thus. This is quite the question to finish off our look at the Great French Cavalry charges. There are so many different opinions, and we are obviously never going to know for sure. Eyewitness reports of 20 plus seem wildly exaggerated and must refer to individual squadron charges against particular squares that this eyewitness is observing as the French cavalry mill around looking to exploit any sort of weakness. When it comes to the massed formation charges up and over that ridge, these are estimated to be between 6 and 12. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to leave this discussion on the Great French Cavalry charges at Waterloo. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give us a like and subscribe, and check our playlist for well over 100 videos on a wide range of historical topics. Also, if anything in this video has piqued your interest, you want to make a comment on it, please do leave a comment below. And if you want me to cover anything else that I haven't yet covered on Waterloo, I've covered Hougoumont, Mont-Saint-Jean, Papelotte, and now these French cavalry charges. Haven't yet done the Erlon's attack or the attack of the Old Guard. So please, if you'd like me to try my best at doing a video on one of those, please do leave a comment. But in the meantime, thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.